The uninvited guest at a lavish party. I confront someone who hurt my family years ago, igniting tense confrontations, hidden truths, and emotional chaos that no one expected. The night was electric, buzzing with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. I stepped into the sprawling loft, instantly overwhelmed by the sheer number of people, the swirling lights, and the scent of expensive perfume mingling with the faint tang of alcohol. My friends had insisted I come, promising that this would be the party of the season, an event where everyone who mattered would be present at it first. I tried to blend in, moving through clusters of guests, exchanging casual smiles, and nodding at faces I vaguely recognized. The chatter around me seemed almost hypnotic, a constant hum of excitement and gossip. I felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease, aware that this wasn't just any party. It was one where reputations were on display, alliances were tested, and secrets had a way of surfacing. I grabbed a drink from the bar, feeling the cool glass warm in my hands, and scanned the room. The DJs switched tracks, the bass thumping through the floor, vibrating up through my shoes. The crowd moved in waves, a mass of shimmering dresses, tailored suits, and loud laughter. I forced a smile, trying to appear relaxed, even though an undercurrent of tension ran through me. Everyone seemed to be having fun, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Perhaps it was just nerves, or maybe it was the way I was hyper-aware of the past, the small details of the room, the people. Little things, the way someone whispered across a corner, a glance that lingered too long, a laugh that sounded forced, kept me alert. On edge. I tried to talk to a few friends, share a joke, and get lost in the easy rhythm of casual conversation. But my eyes kept drifting, scanning for faces I knew, searching for comfort in familiar expressions. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all felt distant at times, a background to my inner tension, like the calm before a storm. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, I saw him. A figure in the crowd, leaning against the far wall, watching, almost casually, but with a presence that immediately pulled me out of my attempt at normalcy. My stomach dropped. It had been years since I last saw him, yet I recognized every detail. The slight smirk, the way he carried himself, the cold, calculating eyes that seemed to pierce right through the crowd, and through me. My pulse quickened. Memories I had tried to bury resurfaced instantly, vivid and sharp. The things he had done to my family, the chaos he had caused, the tension that had lingered in the shadows of our lives. All of it hit me at once. And now he was here, in the same room, pretending to enjoy the party like nothing had happened. Like the past could be erased with a smile and a handshake. I set my drink down, suddenly aware of how tense my hands were, and took a slow breath. This wasn't just a casual encounter. This was a test of composure, of courage, and of how I would face the past when it literally walked into the room. Every instinct screamed at me to avoid him, to flee, but a part of me knew I couldn't. I had to see this through. I tried to focus on conversations around me, to laugh at jokes and nod along with friends, but my attention kept snapping back to him. He wasn't mingling the way most guests did. He lingered in corners, observed the room with that same calculating stare, and occasionally sipped from a glass like he owned the entire space. Every so often, his gaze swept the room, and my heart would skip a beat, convinced it might land on me. I couldn't ignore the flood of memories rushing in. The sleepless nights my family endured after his betrayal. The arguments, the sense of violation that never fully faded. How dare he show up here, at this party, pretending as if none of it had ever happened? My stomach twisted, a knot of anger, fear, and disbelief. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and strangely on edge, like walking into a minefield while someone watched every step. I attempted to remain calm, leaning against a table and sipping my drink, trying to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it had been years, maybe people change, but deep down, I knew the person across the room hadn't truly been held accountable for what he'd done. And now, under the bright lights and the laughter of oblivious partygoers, he was here, smug and untouchable. Then, he shifted his position slightly, and our eyes met for a fleeting second. It was like a jolt of electricity. My pulse spiked, every nerve on edge. That smirk was still there, the same infuriating confidence, the arrogance that had caused so much damage. I felt my face flush, anger rising in waves. I wanted to storm across the room, demand an explanation, or maybe just yell to make sure he understood I hadn't forgotten. But I held myself back, forcing a careful, measured breath. I scanned the surrounding crowd, hoping no one else noticed the tension twisting inside me. I could feel my friends chatting beside me, oblivious, laughing at some trivial comment, while I was teetering on the edge of confrontation. I clenched my glass tightly, knuckles white, and silently cursed myself for letting him have this power over my emotions after all this time. The party continued, music thumping and chatter flowing. But to me, time had slowed. Every laugh, every toast, every cheer was background noise to the storm building inside. And yet, I couldn't look away. Part of me needed to know if he was the same man. If the darkness I remembered still lingered in his eyes. Finally, a mutual acquaintance approached him, giving me a brief, fleeting window to study his posture, the way he carried himself. Everything was the same, yet polished. He had clearly prepared for this event, blending charm with menace, making it hard to read whether he remembered the past as vividly as I did. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest part. The uncertainty. I took another deep breath, forcing myself to focus, to plan my next move. Should I confront him now, in front of everyone, or wait until I could speak privately? My mind raced with scenarios, each one more nerve-wracking than the last. But one thing was certain. I couldn't leave without facing him. The night, which had begun with excitement and anticipation, had shifted. A tension hung in the air now, invisible to everyone else but suffocating to me. He was here, I was here, and the past was about to collide with the present in ways I wasn't yet prepared for. I watched him casually mingle. A flood of memories crashed over me with merciless intensity. I could see it all as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. The late nights my family spent worrying, the frantic phone calls that went unanswered, the whispered arguments behind closed doors. Every betrayal, every manipulation he had caused replayed in my mind like a relentless montage. Sharp and unyielding, that I remembered the night he first interfered in our lives. How his careless actions had left my family scrambling to pick up the pieces. My parents' faces haunted me, etched with disappointment and exhaustion. The arguments with my siblings resurfaced too, heated words fueled by frustration and helplessness. It wasn't just anger I felt. It was the deep, lingering sense of injustice that had never truly faded. Even now, years later, the pain was still raw. I could feel the tightness in my chest, the familiar churn of nausea that accompanied these recollections. I hated that he had the audacity to appear so composed, so unaffected, as if the chaos he had sown had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience in his life. Meanwhile, my family had carried the scars. I could almost hear my mother's voice, trembling with suppressed frustration, warning me to be careful, to watch for people like him. Every detail of that night came rushing back, the sneering smile, the condescending tone, the subtle manipulations that made us doubt our own instincts. I could feel my teeth clench involuntarily, fists tightening around my drink. Even the faintest memory, the way he had dismissed concerns with a shrug, the casual cruelty in his eyes, made my stomach twist. But alongside the anger, a strange sense of determination began to grow. The memories weren't just painful. They were a reminder of why I couldn't let him have any more power over me. They fueled a cautious resolve. I wouldn't allow fear or resentment to dictate my actions tonight. I needed to confront him, to assert myself, and perhaps even extract some form of closure that had eluded me for years. The crowd around me blurred into the background. Laughter, music, chatter, all of it faded as I focused entirely on the figure across the room. He looked so calm, so untouched by the consequences of his past actions, but I knew better. I could see the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes occasionally darted toward familiar faces, scanning, calculating. Perhaps he too was aware, in some way, that history had not been kind to him. Yet the memories weren't merely anger-inducing. They were a mirror, reflecting my own anxieties and vulnerabilities. I realized that part of me had been carrying this burden alone, letting it fester without speaking out, without confronting it. And now here he was, forcing me to face everything at once, my fear, my anger, my need for resolution. The room felt suddenly smaller, oppressive even, as though the weight of the past had settled in the corners, pressing down on me. Every laugh from the other guests, every clink of a glass, every snippet of conversation seemed to echo the chaos of that night so many years ago. It was as if the universe had conspired to place me here, in this exact moment, with the past staring me directly in the face. I took a long, steadying breath, trying to ground myself in the present. Memories would always exist, but I realized that how I responded to them now would define the rest of the evening. I could let the shadows of the past dictate my actions, or I could use them as a catalyst for confronting the situation with courage, clarity, and resolve. That a mix of fear and resolve churned within me, coiling like a spring ready to release. I knew one thing for certain. Tonight, I would no longer be a silent witness to history repeating itself. It was time to take control, to step out from the shadow of what had happened and face him, not as a victim, but as someone ready to reclaim agency over my life and emotions. I knew I couldn't confront him just yet. Not here, not in front of the entire party. So, I tried to distract myself, weaving through the crowd, forcing a smile, and laughing at jokes that barely registered in my mind. I grabbed another drink, hoping the warmth of the glass and the slight burn of the alcohol would steady my nerves. That I found a group of friends near the bar, their laughter loud and carefree. "Hey, glad you made it," one of them said, clapping me on the shoulder. I smiled and nodded, trying to match their energy, but my thoughts kept drifting back to him. Every movement he made, every shift of his gaze, tugged at my awareness, pulling me out of the present. That we moved into a conversation about work, weekend plans, and the usual small talk that makes people feel connected. I laughed, chimed in, even cracked a joke or two, but there was a constant tension just beneath the surface. Every time someone glanced toward the far wall, my heart rate spiked. I had to keep reminding myself, "Don't panic, stay composed." The music thumped through the room, a heavy bass line that rattled my chest. I tried focusing on the rhythm, letting it occupy my senses, but even that failed. My peripheral vision caught him moving again, this time across the room toward a small cluster of guests. He wasn't directly looking at me, but the knowledge that he could was enough to make my skin crawl. That I attempted to engage more deeply with friends, asking questions, joking, nodding, trying to anchor myself in the moment. "You've been quiet tonight," one friend said, raising an eyebrow. I laughed it off, murmuring something about being tired from work, but inside I felt my composure fraying. Every sip of my drink seemed to remind me of the knot in my stomach. Even the conversations around me felt heavy, as if they were being filtered through my anxiety. I heard fragments of chatter, laughter, gossip, light-hearted complaints, but each sound seemed distorted, warped by my focus on him. I caught a snippet of someone joking about old rivalries, and my pulse skipped. Was that a veiled reference to him, or my mind twisting everything into a potential threat? I moved toward the balcony, hoping the cool air outside would offer some clarity. The night breeze hit my face, and I closed my eyes for a moment, drawing deep breaths. I could hear the party continue inside, muffled but persistent, like a distant storm. For a brief moment, I felt the tiniest sliver of peace, but it was fleeting. My internal debate raged on. Should I confront him here and risk a scene? Or should I wait, gather evidence, and approach him privately? Each thought spiraled into another, a web of anxiety and strategic planning. I realized that distraction wasn't working. The moment of reckoning was inevitable. As I re-entered the party, I forced a smile at anyone who looked my way. I laughed at a joke, nodded at a compliment, and tried to engage genuinely. But underneath it all, a storm brewed, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and the simmering need for resolution. And then, from across the room, our eyes met again. That brief contact reminded me, no matter how much I tried to distract myself, I couldn't avoid the truth. He was here, and the confrontation I had been dreading was closer than ever. That I was attempting to chat with a small group near the snack table when I felt a shift in the energy around me. A subtle hush, the faint pause of conversation that signals someone important or dangerous has entered your immediate awareness. And then, as if drawn by some invisible thread, he was there, standing just a few feet away, casually leaning against the counter, holding a drink, and giving that same smirk that haunted my memories. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the room seemed to narrow. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses, all of it faded into a dull background hum. My pulse surged, and I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. I could almost hear my heart pounding in my ears as the memories of his past betrayals surfaced again. This wasn't just someone I disliked. This was a person who had upended my family, who had left scars that hadn't healed. Then he smiled, a small, almost innocuous curl of the lips, and said, "Hey, it's been a while." The words themselves were casual, but the undertone carried that same arrogance I remembered, the subtle challenge that had always infuriated me. I froze, unsure whether to respond with calm politeness or confrontational anger. Yeah, a long while. I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. My mind raced, analyzing every possible angle. Should I make a joke? Should I ignore him? Should I just walk away? My friends were nearby, but I knew they couldn't intervene in this delicate dance between past and present. He took a small step closer, tilting his head slightly. "I didn't expect to see you here," he continued. "This place is lively." There was that hint of mockery, soft but unmistakable, a reminder that he enjoyed testing boundaries. I clenched my jaw, forcing a casual sip of my drink, hoping it masked the tension coursing through my body. "Yeah," I replied carefully, keeping my tone neutral. "Lots of people tonight." My eyes flicked toward the crowd, as if the abundance of guests could shield me from the gravity of this encounter. But it didn't. He was right there, in the same room. And he knew exactly how to push buttons that had been dormant for years. That he chuckled lightly, a sound that made my skin crawl, and raised his glass in a subtle, almost imperceptible toast. I felt the urge to retaliate, to make him acknowledge the chaos he had caused, but I also knew that losing my composure now would play right into his hands. I forced a slow breath, focusing on grounding myself, on remembering that I was in control of my next move. For a tense few seconds, we stood there in silence, a verbal and emotional stalemate, before he finally nodded toward the crowd and drifted back into the throng of guests. But even as he disappeared from immediate view, the weight of the interaction lingered. Every glance, every smirk, every subtle inflection had left an imprint on my mind. I turned back to my friends, trying to laugh at some trivial comment, but the energy had shifted. The casual fun of the evening had been replaced by a simmering tension, a heightened awareness of every movement around me. I realized that nothing tonight would be simple or carefree anymore. The encounter, brief as it was, ignited a storm inside me, a mixture of anger, fear, and determination. I knew that the confrontation wasn't over. It had only just begun, and I had to prepare myself for what was coming next. The air around me felt different after that brief interaction. I could sense subtle shifts in the room, glances exchanged between guests, hushed murmurs, and the faint ripple of whispers that seemed to travel faster than the music itself. My heart raced as I tried to decipher whether people were noticing the tension between us, or if it was just my imagination magnifying every glance. I overheard snippets of conversation as I moved through the crowd. "Did you see him? Standing over there," someone murmured, just loud enough for me to catch. Another guest laughed softly and added, "I think he's hiding something. Look at that look." Each comment felt like a small punch, reminding me that tonight's events weren't happening in isolation. People were already picking up on the undercurrents, the invisible drama simmering beneath the festive exterior. Friends tried to engage me in conversation, but their questions barely registered. I could smile and nod, but my mind kept circling back to him. Every movement he made, every tilt of his head, every subtle gesture was magnified. The whispers weren't just words. They were reminders of the past and warnings about the present. I found myself scanning the room constantly, noticing the way he interacted with others. Casual handshakes, light laughter, and fleeting smiles all seemed calculated, performed to maintain a veneer of charm. It was infuriating and unsettling. My pulse quickened every time he looked in my direction, and I could feel the weight of my emotions pressing down, a mixture of anger, fear, and unresolved pain. The whispers grew louder in my mind, a chorus of judgment and speculation. Were people thinking about the old incidents, about what he had done to my family? Or were they just sensing the tension between us? Either way, it added to the pressure, making it harder to focus, harder to act with clarity. That I took a deep breath and tried to ground myself, reminding myself that I still had control. I had to navigate this carefully. One wrong move, one misinterpreted glance, and the night could spiral into chaos. I forced a smile, laughed at a joke someone made, and nodded along as conversations flowed around me. But internally, I was sharpening my awareness, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Every whisper, every subtle movement, every reaction of the crowd felt like pieces of a puzzle. I began piecing together how to approach him later, when I could have some measure of control, when the moment wouldn't be dictated by surprise or fear. I needed to strategize, to maintain composure, and to ensure that when the time came, I could face him without losing myself to anger or panic. By the time the music shifted to a slower track, I felt a combination of exhaustion and heightened alertness. The whispers, the stares, the subtle hints of tension in the room, all were a constant reminder. This wasn't just a party anymore. It had become a stage, with all eyes, knowingly or unknowingly, watching how I would respond. And I knew that every decision from here on out would matter. Every glance, every word, every movement could escalate the situation or help me regain control. I couldn't ignore it, and I couldn't let it consume me. I had to plan my next move carefully, balancing restraint with determination. Knowing that the storm was far from over, I stepped aside from the crowd, leaning against a pillar and trying to collect my thoughts. My chest was still tight, my pulse racing from the last interaction. Part of me screamed to confront him immediately, to demand answers, to make him acknowledge the chaos he had caused. But another part, quieter and calculating, warned me to wait, to think, to pick the right moment. My mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Anger, fear, frustration, and a strange, reluctant curiosity all collided. What was he doing here? Had he changed? Or was this just another performance, another subtle manipulation designed to unsettle me? The uncertainty gnawed at me, making my stomach churn. I remembered the past, the betrayals, the late-night arguments, the sleepless nights my family endured. That memory fueled my desire for confrontation, but I also knew that rushing in recklessly could make me look foolish, or worse, give him the upper hand. Every instinct screamed at me to protect myself, yet I also felt a moral pull, a need to face the situation head-on. I replayed the moment we'd locked eyes earlier, analyzing every inflection, every movement. His smirk, the casual tilt of his head, the subtle confidence. It was all a challenge, a test. But was it just arrogance? Or was there something deeper beneath the surface? I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty both terrified and intrigued me. My friends were nearby, laughing and chatting, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. I envied their carefree demeanor, their ability to be present without the weight of the past pressing down on them. But I couldn't afford that luxury. This was personal, and I needed to navigate it carefully. I considered my options. I could confront him directly, here in front of everyone, risking public drama but asserting my position. I could wait until later, catch him alone, and demand answers in private. Or I could avoid him entirely, let the night pass, and hope for closure another way. Each choice carried risks and consequences. The fear of looking weak battled with my anger, a tug-of-war that made my head spin. I knew that whatever I chose, it would shape not just the night but the lingering effects on my family, my reputation, and my own sense of justice. I couldn't let indecision paralyze me. Finally, I resolved to stay close but not confront yet. I would watch, observe, gather information. I would let him reveal his intentions, expose his true self through words and actions, and only then would I act. It wasn't avoidance, it was strategy, and I felt a small surge of control amid the chaos in my chest. The music continued to pulse through the room, the laughter and clinking glasses forming a background hum to my inner storm. I reminded myself to stay composed, to keep my emotions in check, and to prepare for whatever came next. This wasn't just a party anymore. It was a test, and I intended to pass on my own terms. The longer I observed him, the clearer it became. Tonight would not end quietly. Every decision, every glance, every conversation was a step closer to the inevitable confrontation. And deep down, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation, knowing that the past and present were about to collide in a way I couldn't ignore. That I finally spotted the moment I had been waiting for. He had drifted to a quieter corner of the room, away from the main crowd, laughing lightly with a small group of acquaintances. The opportunity was fleeting, but it was perfect. I walked over, forcing my steps to be calm, my face composed, even as my heart hammered in my chest. Mind if I join you for a moment? I asked, my voice steady, masking the swirl of emotions beneath. He turned toward me, surprised for a fraction of a second, but quickly replaced it with that infuriatingly casual smile. Not at all, he said, gesturing toward the empty space beside him. It's been a long time. His tone was measured, deliberate, as if choosing every word to keep me off balance. That I leaned slightly closer, keeping my voice quiet but firm. Yeah, too long. We need to talk. My stomach twisted as I spoke, the anger and fear I had held at bay for hours threatening to spill over. He nodded slowly, folding his arms across his chest. I figured this might happen tonight. What exactly do you want to talk about? There was a controlled calmness in his tone that made my teeth clench. He wasn't apologetic. He wasn't remorseful. He was ready for this, just like I was. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. You know what you did to my family? To me. You left scars that didn't heal, and here you are, acting like nothing happened. My voice shook slightly, betraying the mix of anger and lingering hurt. His smile didn't waver. I see. And you think I came here to flaunt it? His tone wasn't defensive, it was teasing, calculated. I didn't think you'd come face to face with me tonight. I clenched my fists at my sides, struggling to maintain control. I'm not here to play games. I need to know why you did it. And I need to hear some accountability. My eyes bore into his, searching for a flicker of honesty, a crack in that confident facade. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze sharp and unreadable. Then, with a slow sigh, he leaned back slightly. You're still angry. I won't deny it. But do you really think there's a simple answer? Life isn't a storybook, and people, they make mistakes. I made mine. You made yours. I felt my blood boil. Mistakes? You destroyed trust, caused chaos, and walked away as if it meant nothing. My voice rose, low enough to avoid drawing attention, but sharp with emotion. And now, you come here and expect me to just let it slide. He raised his hands slightly, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. I'm not asking you to let it slide. I'm saying you can't rewrite what happened. All we can do is face it and see what happens next. I exhaled slowly, the fight inside me still raging, but the reality of the conversation settling in. This wasn't going to be easy. The confrontation had begun, but the resolution, if there could even be one, would take everything I had done. I nodded, my mind already strategizing the next words, the next move. The tension in my chest remained, thick and unrelenting, but for the first time that night, I felt a strange sense of purpose. This was the moment I had been preparing for, and I wouldn't back down. The room seemed to shrink around us as the confrontation began to draw subtle attention. Guests nearby glanced in our direction, sensing the undercurrent of conflict, though they couldn't hear the exact words exchanged. The laughter and chatter that had filled the space now felt muted, like a backdrop to the storm brewing between us. I could feel the heat rising in my face, the tension coiling in my shoulders. My mind raced, running through every possible scenario, every word I could use to maintain control while demanding the accountability I needed. I refused to let him manipulate me again. Not here, not tonight. You think standing there and smiling makes everything okay? I asked, my voice steady but loaded with intensity. Do you even understand what you put my family through? The sleepless nights, the arguments, the distrust? All of it because of you. He tilted his head slightly, his smirk returning, but this time it carried a hint of unease. I never claimed it was easy, he said. I know it hurt, but holding on to that anger, it won't change what happened. Are we going to argue forever, or are you going to tell me what you really want? I felt a rush of frustration. I want the truth. I want honesty. And I want to know if you even regret any of it, or if I'm just entertaining myself by confronting you tonight. My hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm of emotions churning inside. The subtle glances from nearby guests added to the pressure. I sensed whispers, curious eyes, the quiet anticipation of people wondering what drama was unfolding. I hated that part of me wanted them to see, wanted some external validation of the injustice I felt, but I pushed that thought away. This wasn't a performance. It was personal. He laughed softly, almost dismissively, shaking his head. You're still carrying all of that weight. I can't fix the past. And maybe you don't even want me to. You just want to feel in control again. His words struck like a knife, cutting through my defensive wall. How much did he really know about me? Or was he simply guessing? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Maybe I do want control. But more than that, I want closure. I want to understand why you did what you did. And I want to see that you recognize the consequences of your actions. My eyes narrowed, forcing him to meet my gaze, to acknowledge the gravity of the situation that he studied me silently. And for a long, tense moment, neither of us spoke. The music continued to pulse faintly in the background, but it no longer mattered. The room, the guests, the entire party, all of it faded to a blur. This was the pivotal moment, the one that would define how the night unfolded. Finally, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. You want honesty? Fine. I made mistakes. I hurt people I shouldn't have. And yeah, I regret some of it. But you're not just angry at me. You're angry at what happened, at the circumstances, at life. And no matter what I say, some of that anger will never go away. His words landed like a thunderclap, a mix of truth and deflection, and I felt my own internal struggle intensify. Anger, disappointment, and a strange flicker of pity collided inside me. I had wanted clarity, confrontation, resolution, but his response was neither full confession nor denial. It was complicated, messy, human. I exhaled slowly, realizing that the tension wasn't just between us, it was inside me, a reflection of the years I had spent processing betrayal, injustice, and the lingering scars left behind. And even as the confrontation escalated, I understood that the night was far from over, that the emotional storm was only beginning to take its full shape. As the tension between us reached a peak, a sudden movement caught my eye. From across the room, someone was watching, someone I hadn't noticed before. A mutual acquaintance, someone who had been quietly blending into the crowd, now lingered near the corner, their gaze fixed intently on our confrontation. My stomach sank. The last thing I wanted was an audience. But the moment I realized I wasn't alone in this, a new layer of pressure settled over me. Every word I spoke, every reaction I had, was now potentially witnessed, dissected, and gossiped about. The stakes had just multiplied. He noticed them too. His smirk faltered ever so slightly, replaced by a subtle flicker of caution. Looks like we have an audience, he said under his breath, though it was loud enough for me to hear. That small acknowledgement sent a shiver down my spine. He was aware, and he always knew how to adjust, how to play the room. I forced myself to stay composed. It doesn't matter, I whispered back, though my mind raced. It absolutely mattered. People were watching, and their interpretations could alter everything. Our reputations, the perception of the confrontation, the lingering consequences of past mistakes. The observer didn't move closer, but their presence was palpable. I could feel their eyes on every gesture, every tone of my voice. My hands tightened into fists at my sides, but I reminded myself to breathe, to maintain composure. I had prepared for him, not for an audience, but I wouldn't let this derail me. He leaned closer, his voice low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of challenge. Do you want me to play nice because someone's watching? Or do you want the real truth? The words struck like a blade, sharp and unnerving. He was testing me, measuring my resolve, pushing me to reveal whether I could stay firm under scrutiny. I hesitated, feeling the heat of embarrassment, frustration, and determination all at once. I don't care who's watching, I said finally, my voice stronger than I felt. I'm not here for showmanship. I'm here for answers. My gaze flicked briefly to the observer. They hadn't moved, hadn't reacted, but the subtle tension of being seen made my words feel heavier, more consequential. The small crowd nearby had started to notice too, whispers creeping into the periphery. I felt their curious eyes, the soft exchange of questions and speculations, but I focused on him, on the truth I needed to uncover. Their presence only intensified my resolve. I wouldn't be intimidated, wouldn't allow my emotions to be manipulated by either him or the unseen witness. He exhaled slowly, his posture shifting subtly, a hint of respect, or perhaps calculation, passing through his expression. Fine, he said finally, his tone measured. Let's get this out in the open then. You want honesty, you'll have it. Even as he spoke, my mind raced through the implications. Witnesses, reputations, consequences. The confrontation had just gained an extra dimension, but I also felt a surge of determination. If I could hold my ground here, if I could navigate this under scrutiny, I would emerge not only with answers, but with control of the narrative. I squared my shoulders, bracing for what was next. The stakes were higher than I had anticipated, but the confrontation would continue, and this time, nothing would be left unspoken. The room seemed to hold its breath as he finally began to speak more openly. I could see it in his eyes. No smirk this time, only the faint traces of conflict and guarded honesty. Every word he uttered felt heavy, charged with the tension of years of unresolved resentment and hidden truths. "You want to know why I did what I did?" he started, voice low but deliberate. "The truth. It's complicated. I never intended to hurt anyone as much as I did. Things spiraled out of control, and by the time I realized it, I was trapped in my own mistakes." He paused, letting the weight of his admission settle between us that I struggled to keep my emotions in check. Anger and disbelief threatened to spill over, but I focused on listening, on absorbing the details, even as my mind raced with questions. "Trapped," I echoed, my voice sharper than I meant. "You call destroying trust, creating chaos, and hurting my family being trapped." He flinched, but only slightly, and exhaled. "I know it sounds like an excuse. Maybe it is, but I've spent years trying to make sense of my choices. I thought I was protecting myself, but in the process, I destroyed the things I cared about most. You, your family, everyone." I felt my pulse quicken, a mix of anger, disbelief, and an unexpected twinge of empathy. I didn't want to forgive him, not yet, but hearing the truth, even partially, was jarring. I wanted him to understand the chaos he had caused, the sleepless nights, the tension that lingered long after he was gone. "And you just come to a party, pretending everything's fine?" I demanded, my voice rising slightly. "Do you think I could ever forget? Or that my family would?" He shook his head, a shadow crossing his face. "No, I don't expect you to forget. I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight. I'm just laying it out. You deserve the truth, and tonight, I can't run from it anymore." The observer in the corner shifted, subtly drawing attention, but I ignored them, focusing on the raw honesty emerging from him. It was uncomfortable, infuriating, but also strangely liberating. For the first time, the tangled knot of anger, confusion, and tension felt like it was unraveling. Just slightly that I swallowed hard, my hands clenched at my sides. "Fine. The truth. Then tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't twist it. I want to know the reality of what happened, not the version you want me to hear." He nodded slowly, eyes locking onto mine, and began recounting events in a way I hadn't expected, admitting missteps, revealing secrets that explained some, but not all, of the chaos he had caused. Each revelation struck like a small shock, mixing anger, disbelief, and an uneasy understanding that as the minutes stretched on, I realized the confrontation had evolved into something larger than personal anger. It was a reckoning, a forced reflection on past mistakes, accountability, and the unpredictable consequences of actions that had been left unexamined for too long. And even as he spoke, I could feel the lingering tension from the surrounding guests, the whispers that had started to circulate, and the watchful eyes of the observer. But I no longer cared. This was about closure, honesty, and the truth finally surfacing, no matter how painful. That I took a deep breath, feeling the first slivers of clarity piercing through the fog of past hurt. The confrontation wasn't over, but for the first time that night, I felt that the path forward, however messy, was becoming visible. The confrontation finally reached its slow conclusion. He fell silent, and for a moment, the noise of the party seemed distant, almost irrelevant. I could feel my body trembling slightly, a mix of adrenaline, exhaustion, and lingering anger. The words had been exchanged, the truths revealed, and now the weight of the moment settled heavily on both of us. That I stepped back, taking a deep breath, trying to ground myself. Guests nearby had started whispering, exchanging glances that betrayed curiosity, judgment, and fascination. Some looked shocked, others intrigued. I realized our confrontation had become a spectacle, a live drama unfolding amidst laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. He watched me carefully, eyes scanning my expression for any sign of weakness, acceptance, or change. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing my inner turmoil fully exposed, but I couldn't hide the exhaustion etched into my features. This had been months, no, years, of pent-up tension finally surfacing in one electric, volatile exchanged, and I walked slowly toward a quieter corner, letting the noise of the party wash over me. The adrenaline ebbed, replaced by a reflective stillness. I thought about the past, the betrayal, the hurt, the sleepless nights, the anger that had gnawed at me for so long. I thought about the present, the confrontation, the honesty, the long overdue acknowledgement of consequences, despite the chaos. Despite the watching eyes and whispered speculation, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a recognition that I had faced the situation head-on, that I had demanded truth and refused to be manipulated or intimidated. That, in itself, was a victory. He approached me slowly, his expression softer now, tinged with a hint of respect or perhaps uncertainty. "I didn't expect you to handle this the way you did," he said quietly. "It's different than I imagined." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "It's not about handling it the way you imagined. It's about facing it. And now, at least, we know where we stand." He hesitated, then slowly stepped back, leaving the space between us defined but neutral. The tension didn't vanish. It couldn't. Not entirely. But it shifted, became less volatile, more contained. I could breathe again, feel my heartbeat return to something resembling normalcy. As I moved back toward the main crowd, I noticed the subtle reactions of the guests, curious stares, whispered speculations, some awkward avoidance. The night continued, but for me, the most intense drama had passed. I had navigated the storm, confronted the past, and emerged with clarity. Even if it was messy and imperfect, I caught myself smiling faintly, a mixture of relief and cautious satisfaction. The party was still loud, chaotic, full of energy and distractions, but I carried with me a quiet sense of triumph. I had faced the confrontation, demanded honesty, and survived. That was enough for now. And as the music played on, the laughter echoed, and the night stretched before me, I knew that whatever came next, rumors, judgments, lingering tensions, I was prepared. I had faced the storm, and I had not been broken.